Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the security footage of a stranger's Tesla charging in her driveway. The woman inside her cabin, rifling through her dead husband's belongings. But when Sarah discovered what Karen had really come looking for, and why she'd chosen this exact cabin on this exact weekend, the widow realized that sometimes the most devastating revenge comes wrapped in perfect, twisted justice. What Karen didn't know was that Sarah had been waiting for her to arrive. The mountain cabin stood like a fortress of solitude against the Colorado pines, its cedar walls weathered by 15 winters of Sarah's grief. She pressed her forehead against the kitchen window, watching snowflakes dance in the morning light. When the sound of tires on gravel shattered her sanctuary, a white Tesla Model S glided up her driveway with the silent arrogance of expensive technology. Sarah's breath fogged the glass as she watched a woman, in designer activewear, emerge blonde, highlights perfectly styled despite the mountain air, oversized sunglasses perched like a crown above surgically enhanced cheekbones. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, pulling her husband's old flannel tighter around her shoulders. The woman mid-40s, dripping with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no, surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone appraising real estate. She popped the Tesla's trunk, retrieving a leather overnight bag and what looked like a charging cable. Sarah's bare feet hit the cold hardwood as she rushed to the front door, yanking it open just as the stranger reached her porch steps. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, her voice sharper than intended. "This is private property." The woman paused, lowering her sunglasses to reveal ice-blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Sarah's appearance: the unbrushed hair, the makeup-free face, the wedding ring she still wore 3 years after David's funeral. "Oh, honey," the woman said, her voice saccharine with false sympathy. "I'm Karen Whitfield. I think there's been some confusion." "Confusion?" Sarah stepped onto the porch, ignoring the bite of October air against her ankles. "About what, exactly?" Karen's smile was razor-thin. "About who owns this cabin." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the porch railing, splinters biting into her palm. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "I said there's been confusion about ownership." Karen's tone shifted, becoming businesslike and cold. "My late husband, Marcus Whitfield, had some arrangements with David Chen regarding this property, arrangements that I'm here to collect on." Sarah's world tilted. David Chen, her David, never mentioned anyone named Marcus Whitfield, never mentioned any arrangements, never mentioned anything that would give this woman the right to stand on their porch, making ownership claims. "You're mistaken," Sarah said, though her voice betrayed the first tremor of uncertainty. "My husband built this cabin. We've owned it for 20 years. Karen's laugh was glass-breaking. "Built it, yes. But with whose money, sweetheart?" She reached into her designer purse, withdrawing a manila folder thick with documents. Marcus kept meticulous records. Every loan, every handshake deal, every favor called in. "Your husband was quite the gambler, wasn't he?" The blood drained from Sarah's face. David's gambling, the secret that had nearly destroyed their marriage in the early years, the addiction he'd fought so hard to overcome, the shame that had died with him. "How could you possibly know about that?" Karen's smile widened. "Because my husband was the one David owed money to, a lot of money. And when Marcus died 6 months ago, I inherited all his investments." Sarah's legs felt unsteady. Even if that were true, which it's not, David died 3 years ago. Any debts died with him. "Oh, honey," Karen stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something colder, the smell of a predator closing in on wounded prey. "That's where you're wrong. The debt was secured against this property. Marcus was very thorough about these things." She held out the folder. "It's all here. The original loan agreement, the property lien, the interest calculations. With compound interest over 3 years, you owe the estate $847,000. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. 800, that's impossible. Gambling debts compound quickly when they're tied to property collateral. Karen's voice carried the mechanical precision of someone who'd delivered this speech before. Marcus learned that from his father, who learned it from his father. Old family business, you might say. The implications crashed over Sarah like an avalanche. The cabin her refuge, her last connection to David, the place where they'd planned to grow old together was apparently built on borrowed money. Money from a loan shark. Money that had somehow become this woman's inheritance. "I need to see those documents," Sarah said, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. Of course, Karen's smile was indulgent, like a teacher praising a slow student. "But first, I need to get my car plugged in. It's been a long drive from Denver, and I'll be staying here while we sort out the transfer of ownership." "Staying here?" Sarah's voice cracked. "You can't just actually." "I can." Karen was already heading back toward her Tesla, her heels clicking against the wooden steps with military precision. "The lien gives me property rights pending debt resolution. I could have brought the sheriff, but I thought we could handle this like civilized women." Sarah watched in numb horror as Karen opened her Tesla's charge port and began uncoiling a heavy-duty extension cord from her trunk. The woman moved with practiced efficiency, clearly having done this before. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, though the answer was becoming sickeningly clear. "Plugging into your electrical system." Karen located the outdoor outlet David had installed for Christmas lights, the one Sarah hadn't used since he died. These mountain drives really drain the battery. The irony was suffocating. This stranger was literally plugging her car into the cabin's power system while claiming ownership of the property itself. Sarah felt like she was drowning in quicksand, every struggle only pulling her deeper. "You can't do this," Sarah said, but even she could hear the defeat creeping into her voice. Karen straightened, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. "Honey, I just did." The Tesla's charging indicator glowed blue in the morning light, a small but unmistakable symbol of Karen's invasion. Sarah stared at it, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest, a gear clicking into place that hadn't moved since David's funeral. "The documents?" Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "I want to see every page, of course." Karen shouldered her overnight bag with the casual confidence of someone who'd already won. "We can go through them over coffee. I assume you have decent coffee? This altitude always gives me such headaches." She brushed past Sarah into the cabin without waiting for permission, her expensive boots leaving wet marks on the hardwood floors David had installed with his own hands. Sarah followed her inside, watching the stranger examine her home with the clinical eye of an appraiser. "Cozy," Karen said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but very rustic. She set her bag down on Sarah's kitchen table, the same table where Sarah and David had shared thousands of meals, where they'd planned their retirement, where Sarah had eaten alone for 3 years of anniversaries and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that felt like daggers to the heart. "The coffee's in the cabinet above the sink," Sarah said automatically, muscle memory taking over while her mind reeled. Karen moved through the kitchen like she owned it, opening cabinets, examining the ancient coffee maker, running her fingers along surfaces with the proprietary touch of someone claiming territory. "You know," Karen said conversationally, as she measured coffee grounds, "Marcus always spoke highly of David, said he was a good man who just got in over his head." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Don't. What? "Don't talk about my husband like you knew him." Karen's smile was pitying. "But I did know him, honey. Marcus and David did business for years. Poker games, sports betting, the occasional real estate venture. David was actually quite charming when he wasn't desperate." The casual cruelty of the words, the implication that Sarah's husband had been some kind of regular in this woman's late husband's criminal enterprise made Sarah's vision blur with rage. "You're lying, am I?" Karen poured water into the coffee maker with steady hands. "Then how would I know about the scar on his left hand from that construction accident? Or about his tells when he was bluffing at cards? He had this way of touching his wedding ring when he was nervous." Sarah's breath caught. The scar, the nervous habit Dale's no stranger should know. Details that suggested a relationship between David and Marcus that went deeper than a simple loan. "He never mentioned anyone named Marcus Whitfield," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Of course not." Karen leaned against the counter, perfectly at ease in Sarah's kitchen. "Men like David, good men, family men, they compartmentalize. They keep their business separate from their home life. It's actually quite sweet, in a naive sort of way." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with domestic normalcy that made everything feel even more surreal. Sarah found herself studying this woman who claimed to hold the key to destroying her life, the perfectly applied makeup, the manicured nails, the way she moved through the world like she expected it to accommodate her. She bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, disoriented by the darkness and the echo of terror that seemed to hang in the mountain air. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed it another nightmare about David, another phantom sound from the grief that still ambushed her in sleep. Then she heard it again, a woman's voice, high and panicked, coming from the guest bedroom. "Help! Somebody help me!" Sarah's bare feet hit the cold hardwood as she rushed down the hallway. The guest bedroom door was closed, but she could see light flickering underneath, not the steady glow of a lamp, but something erratic, like sparks or flames. "Karen," Sarah called out, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "What's happening?" "The walls." Karen's voice was raw with panic. "The walls are sparking. There's electricity coming out of the goddamn walls." Sarah pushed open the door and stepped into chaos. Karen stood pressed against the far corner, still in her designer pajamas, pointing at the electrical outlets near the bed. Blue-white sparks were indeed dancing across the wall, crackling between the outlet covers and the baseboards like miniature lightning. "How long has this been happening?" Sarah asked, though she had to raise her voice over the ominous buzzing that filled the room. "I don't know. I woke up and the whole wall was Jesus Christ." "Is that normal?" A particularly violent spark illuminated Karen's face, highlighting the terror in her eyes. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely vulnerable, just a middle-aged woman in silk pajamas, trapped in a room where the walls themselves had turned hostile. "No," Sarah said calmly, "that's not normal." She reached for the light switch, then thought better of it. Electricity was clearly flowing where it shouldn't be, and touching any part of the room's electrical system seemed like an invitation to disaster. "We need to get you out of here," Sarah said. Karen didn't argue. She grabbed her overnight bag and rushed past Sarah into the hallway, her expensive slippers slapping against the hardwood in her haste to escape. "What the hell is wrong with this place?" Karen demanded once they were safely in the living room. That's not just old wiring, that's dangerous. Sarah surveyed the guest bedroom from the doorway. The sparks were getting worse, spreading along the baseboards like electronic fire. The smell of ozone was stronger now, mixing with something that might have been burning insulation. David always said he was going to update the electrical system, Sarah said thoughtfully, but he never got around to it. Update it. Karen's voice cracked with hysteria. It's trying to electrocute people. That's not old wiring. That's a death trap. Mountain living can be challenging, Sarah replied with the kind of calm that comes from watching an enemy's plans crumble, especially for people who aren't used to rustic conditions. Karen stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Rustic conditions. The walls are shooting electricity. That's not rustic. That's insane. Sarah walked to the kitchen and put the coffee on, moving with the unhurried precision of someone following a morning routine. Would you like some breakfast? I was thinking eggs. Breakfast? Karen followed her, clutching her overnight bag, like a lifeline. Are you hearing yourself? Your house is trying to kill me, and you're offering me eggs? The guest room has electrical problems, Sarah corrected. The rest of the house is fine. She cracked eggs into a pan with steady hands, as if electrified walls were just another minor inconvenience of cabin life. You could always sleep on the couch. Karen's laugh was brittle with disbelief. Sleep on the couch? In a house where the walls shoot lightning? Are you completely insane? It's just that one room, Sarah said reasonably, and only when there's a heavy electrical load on that circuit. Something in her tone made Karen pause. What do you mean, heavy electrical load? Sarah gestured toward the window, where Karen's Tesla sat in the driveway, still connected to the charging cable. Electric cars draw a lot of power. Sometimes, old electrical systems can't handle the strain. The implication hit Karen like cold water. Her precious Tesla, her status symbol, her technological superiority was literally attacking her through the cabin's wiring. Unplug it, Karen said immediately. Unplug the car right now. I can't do that, Sarah replied, flipping the eggs with casual precision. What do you mean you can't? You asked me to keep it plugged in for the full 3 days? You said you wanted a complete charge. Karen's eyes narrowed. That was before the house started trying to electrocute me. A deal's a deal, Sarah said pleasantly. Besides, you said you owned this property. Shouldn't you be handling your own electrical problems? The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. Karen could demand that Sarah unplug the Tesla, but that would mean admitting she needed help from someone she claimed to have power over. She could unplug it herself. But that would mean going outside and physically disconnecting the charging cable, something that suddenly seemed dangerous given the electrical instability she'd just experienced. Or she could leave entirely, abandoning her claim on the property and admitting defeat to a woman she'd expected to crush without resistance. This is ridiculous, Karen muttered, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. What's ridiculous? You're sabotaging me? Somehow, you're doing this on purpose. Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. How could I sabotage electricity? I'm a retired English teacher, not an electrical engineer. She slid the eggs onto a plate and set it on the kitchen table, right next to the manila folder containing the foreclosure documents. Besides, wouldn't sabotaging my own house be counterproductive? If I really owe you $800,000, damaging the property would just hurt my position. It was flawless logic, which made it all the more infuriating. Karen stood in the kitchen, still clutching her overnight bag, trying to find a flaw in Sarah's reasoning, and coming up empty. I want you to call an electrician, Karen said finally. Of course, Sarah agreed. I'll call first thing Monday morning. Monday? It's Saturday. Call someone now. Sarah's smile was apologetic. Emergency electrical service on a weekend in the mountains costs extra, a lot extra, and since I'm apparently facing foreclosure, I need to be careful with money. The chess match was becoming clearer. Every move Karen tried to make was blocked by the consequences of her own demands. She'd claimed ownership of the property, which made electrical problems her responsibility. She'd demanded the Tesla stay plugged in, which meant accepting the consequences of overloading an old electrical system. She'd established a Monday deadline, which meant living with dangerous conditions until then. Fine, Karen said through gritted teeth. I'll pay for the electrician myself. That's very generous, Sarah said. But most service companies are closed until Monday anyway. Mountain businesses keep limited weekend hours. Karen's face was turning an interesting shade of red. So what exactly are you suggesting? That I spend 2 more nights in a house that's trying to kill me? I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah replied innocently. I'm just explaining the situation. Of course, if you're not comfortable staying here, she'll let the sentence hang in, the air like bait on a hook. Karen could leave, but that would mean abandoning her foreclosure plans and admitting that a rustic cabin and its elderly electrical system had defeated her. She could stay, but that meant spending 2 more nights in what she now perceived as a death trap. There has to be another solution, Karen muttered, more to herself than to Sarah. Well, Sarah said thoughtfully, you could always shut off power to that room entirely. There's a circuit breaker in the basement. Karen's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Where? I'll show you. Sarah led her to the basement door, a narrow wooden portal that opened onto steep stairs descending into darkness. The basement was David's domain, a musty space filled with tools and storage, boxes and the mechanical systems that kept the cabin running. The electrical panel is down there, Sarah said, gesturing into the shadows. Third, switch from the left. Should control the guest bedroom. Karen peered down the stairs with obvious reluctance. The basement looked like something out of a horror movie, cramped, dark, filled with cobwebs, and the kind of mysterious mechanical noises that old houses make. Isn't there a flashlight? Karen asked. There's a pull chain light at the bottom of the stairs, Sarah said. David always said it was perfectly safe. But Karen had heard the stories about basement electrical panels, about people getting electrocuted while trying to flip circuit breakers in flooded basements or during electrical storms. And given what she'd just experienced upstairs, the idea of going into a dark basement to manipulate the cabin's electrical system seemed like suicide. Maybe we should wait for professional help, Karen said, backing away from the basement door. Of course, Sarah agreed. Safety first. They returned to the kitchen, where Karen's eggs were getting cold and the manila folder seemed to mock her with its promises of easy victory. Outside, the Tesla continued charging, drawing power through the cabin's overtaxed electrical system like a technological vampire. I need coffee, Karen said, slumping into a chair. Sarah poured her a cup, noting that Karen's hands were still shaking slightly. The terror from the guest bedroom hadn't entirely faded, and the realization that she was trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation was beginning to sink in. You know, Sarah said conversationally, this reminds me of... The first clap of thunder hit at 4:23 p.m., rattling the cabin windows and sending vibrations through the floorboards. Karen looked up from the foreclosure documents she'd been obsessively reviewing, her face pale in the sudden gray light that filtered through the storm clouds. That sounded close, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Sarah glanced out the kitchen window at the Tesla, its white paint already darkening with the first heavy raindrops. Mountain storms move fast. This one looks like it's going to be a real beast. Another thunder roll, longer and more ominous than the first, seemed to confirm her assessment. The cabin's lights flickered briefly, just a momentary dimming that made Karen's breath catch in her throat. Maybe I should unplug the car, Karen said, half rising from the couch where she'd spent the last few hours in miserable contemplation. In a lightning storm, Sarah's voice carried genuine concern. That seems dangerous. All that metal, all that electricity, ... She was right, and Karen knew it. Standing outside in a thunderstorm, handling electrical connections, while rain poured down and lightning split the sky, was exactly the kind of mistake that got people killed. The Tesla's charging port would be wet, the cable would be slippery, and Karen had no idea what safety protocols electric car manufacturers recommended for severe weather. So what do I do? Karen asked, hating the desperate note that had crept into her voice. What David always did during storms, Sarah replied, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. Wait it out. Lightning illuminated the kitchen. Windows followed immediately by a thunder crack that seemed to shake the cabin's foundation. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and somewhere in the walls came a sound like electricity finding new pathways. This is insane, Karen muttered. People don't live like this. Mountain people do, Sarah said mildly. We learn to work with the weather instead of against it. Another lightning flash, and this time the lights went out completely for 3 full seconds before surging back to life. In that brief darkness, Karen could have sworn she saw sparks dancing behind the electrical outlets in the living room. It's getting worse, she said. Storms do that. Sarah's calm was infuriating. She sat in her chair like she was watching a mildly interesting television program, occasionally sipping her tea, completely unruffled by the electrical chaos building around them. Aren't you worried about your house? Karen demanded. I've weathered worse storms than this, Sarah replied. The cabin has good bones, it'll hold. But even as she spoke, the lights flickered again, and the refrigerator gave an ominous groan, as if struggling against some invisible force. Karen found herself mentally calculating the value of everything in the cabin that could be destroyed by electrical surges: the appliances, the electronics, the Tesla charging outside like a lightning rod on wheels. What about insurance? Karen asked suddenly. What about it? If something happens to my car because of your electrical problems, your homeowner's insurance should cover it. Sarah's smile was enigmatic. Should it? Of course it should. If your property damages my property, you're liable. That's an interesting theory, Sarah said. Of course, you'd have to prove that my property caused the damage, and you'd have to prove that I was negligent in some way. Karen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. What do you mean? Well, you asked to keep your car plugged in. You insisted on it, actually, even after I warned you about the electrical problems. Sarah sipped her tea thoughtfully. A good insurance investigator might wonder why someone would leave an expensive car connected to a known problematic electrical system during a severe thunderstorm. The legal implications crashed over Karen like cold water. She'd been so focused on maintaining dominance, on proving her ownership of the property, that she'd walked straight into a liability trap by demanding that the Tesla stay plugged in. By refusing to disconnect it even after experiencing electrical problems, she'd potentially voided any insurance claims. You planned this, Karen said. Planned a thunderstorm. Sarah's eyebrows rose. I'm flattered, but I don't have that kind of power. Lightning struck somewhere close enough that the thunder was instantaneous, and the entire cabin shook. This time the lights went out for nearly 10 seconds, and when they came back on, Karen could smell something burning. What is that smell? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. Sarah sniffed delicately. Electrical fire, I think. Probably just some old insulation heating up. Electrical fire. Karen shot to her feet. Shouldn't we do something? Like, what? Call the fire department. With what phone? Sarah gestured toward the dead landline. And even if we could call them, they're 40 minutes away on a good day? In weather like this? She shrugged, as if the possibility of the cabin burning down was just another minor inconvenience of mountain living. Karen rushed to the kitchen window, trying to see through the rain to assess whether her Tesla was still safely connected, or had become part of some larger electrical disaster. The charging cable was still plugged in, but the car's lights were flashing in a pattern she'd never seen before, not the normal charging sequence, but something erratic and alarming. Something's wrong with my car, she said. Probably just the storm interfering with the electronics, Sarah said peacefully. Cars don't just malfunction because of weather. Electric cars do. All those computer systems, all that sensitive electronics, they're much more vulnerable than people realize. Another lightning strike, and this time the power went out for a full minute. In the darkness, Karen could hear sounds that made her blood run cold, crackling from the walls. A low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and what sounded like something shorting out in the guest bedroom. When the lights finally came back on, they were dimmer than before, casting weird shadows that made the cabin feel like a different place entirely. We need to leave, Karen said, right now. In this storm. Sarah shook her head. The roads will be washing out. Mountain roads aren't safe in weather like this. Then we need to do something about the electricity. Shut off the main breaker. Stop the car from charging. Something. You're welcome to try, Sarah said. The basement door's right there. Karen stared at the basement door, as if it were the entrance to hell itself. Going down there in the dark, with electricity arcing through the walls and the storm growing worse by the minute, seemed like suicide. Come with me, she said. Why? Because you know where everything is. Because this is your house. Actually, Sarah said thoughtfully, according to your documents, it's your house. Your responsibility. The trap was perfect. Karen had spent all day claiming ownership of the property, demanding recognition of her authority over it. Now, when that ownership came with genuine responsibility and actual danger, she wanted to abdicate it to the woman she'd been trying to intimidate. Fine, Karen snapped. I'll go myself. She grabbed a flashlight from Sarah's kitchen drawer and headed for the basement, her designer slippers slapping against the hardwood floors. At the basement door, she paused, gathering her courage. The third switch from the left, Sarah called helpfully. Unless the labels have changed since David wrote them. Karen descended into the basement, the flashlight beam dancing across walls lined with tools and storage boxes. The electrical panel loomed in the corner like some kind of mechanical oracle, its metal surface humming with barely contained energy. She approached it cautiously, reading the faded labels by flashlight. Kitchen, living room, master bath. And there, third from the left, something that might say guest room if she squinted hard enough. Her hand hovered over the switch. The smart thing to do was flip the main breaker first, cutting power to the entire house. But that would also mean turning off the refrigerator, the water pump, all the systems that made the cabin habitable. More importantly, it would mean admitting that she couldn't handle the situation, that she needed to shut down everything rather than solve the specific problem. Karen reached for the guest room switch. The moment her fingers touched the metal, toggle electricity shot up her arm like liquid fire. She screamed and jerked backward, dropping the flashlight and plunging the basement into darkness. Karen. Sarah's voice drifted down from the kitchen, calm and concerned. Everything all right? Down there? Karen lay on the basement floor, her right arm numbed from fingertips to shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. The electrical shock hadn't been enough to kill her, but it had been more than enough to send a clear message. The electrical system was completely unstable. I got shocked, she called up, her voice shaky. Oh dear, are you hurt? Karen flexed her fingers experimentally. Painful, but functional. I think I'm okay. That's good. Sometimes old electrical panels can be tricky. There was something in Sarah's tone, a note of satisfaction, perhaps, or amusement that made Karen's blood run cold. She groped around in the darkness until she found the flashlight, then made her way carefully back up the stairs. The panel shocked me, she announced as she emerged into the kitchen. Did it? Sarah looked genuinely sympathetic. David always said you had to be careful with electrical work. One wrong move and she made a gesture that suggested various unpleasant possibilities. This is deliberate, Karen said. You've sabotaged your own electrical seas.